Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Members, for this very thoughtful discussion and the opportunity to share our concerns about this initiative. As you know, we are strongly opposed. In addition to the groups that Lauren just mentioned, the State Democratic Party had their convention, also early endorsed a no opposition to position to this measure. Not to belabor the point, just to add a new point here, I mean, you have water infrastructure legislation pending that were introduced, 2 different projects. You have Sites Reservoir, you have Temperance Flats. They're going to be funded in some way. There's going to be a financing plan that will likely include revenue bonds. So now with this particular measure, you're going to see those 2 regions compete. So there will be opposition from the voters in those areas, formalized opposition to oppose one. So they're just going to cross paths and nothing's going to actually happen with regards to this initiative. It is written so vaguely. It is basically what Lauren said about the courts. It is promoting more litigation and uncertainty and risk. And it comes at the expense of our members in every single part of this state, because our members are the ones that see the recession happen first. They're the last ones to get out of the recession. It takes away the tools that this body has to actually address and get out of a particular recession. We just got out of one. We're looking at another one as well, as the economy seems to be slowing down at some point. You're actually debating now, or hopefully debating pretty soon, transportation financing. As you're going to debate this initiative is going to loom over your head. How will you address transportation financing with this actually being on the bond? A bipartisan initiative was unveiled in the Senate to deal with homeless problems, right, mentally ill, and to repurpose some funds from Proposition 63. That will also be encumbered by this initiative as well. So now, are you looking at dropping that $2+ billion to 1.9 simply because this measure is on the ballot? I mean, it is really tying your hands. And Mr. Morlock, you talk about anger. Well, this measure is tying your hands so that it actually creates more voter anger because you won't be able to address the needs of your constituents. We believe this is a wrong-headed move. This is not the right way to address the infrastructure crisis, because it is a crisis. We have a disaster, awareness with particularly the impact of this measure, but we have an infrastructure crisis right now that may even lead to an economic disaster. So we actually really appreciate this conversation. We understand that what all the agencies that were involved here created a level of questions that need to be answered, but unfortunately that train has left the station. This is already on the ballot, and so there's no chance to pull it back unless the proponent actually does so. So we thank you for your time and for highlighting the problems with this initiative.
Just real quickly before we go to Chuck, Mr. Kay, real quick question about this idea of infrastructure. I was talking to some banking folks, and the interest is almost at zero in the argument. Larry Summers talks about this. A lot of folks on George Shultz, a lot of people talk about this. It's just a great economic stimulus because interest rates are so low. We can have different opinions about that. This, in a large measure, takes away that tool. But what I want to ask you, because I thought, given your public policy background, you might be aware of this. The Department of Finance, if I recollect, said something like a 76 cents of every dollar economic feedback effect, positive economic feedback effect for infrastructure investment, so that to the extent that you eliminate this tool because folks are angry and we're going to take this tool away for large projects or refinancing or whatever the case may be, because there may have been a couple of abuses, maybe not, don't know, maybe some projects where people are trying to do that, but we're now affecting hospitals and schools and everybody else under the sun, theoretically. I know you're trying to play the $2 billion game, but I wanted just to briefly address, before we talk about water, the notion of the economic feedback effect because of infrastructure finance and how this tool is so important in that regard, that creates a tax base.
Well, certainly, that's absolutely true. The proponents are acting like we're building too much infrastructure in the state. We're not. That's not our problem. We don't have enough infrastructure. The feedback from infrastructure is more than just building it. And those jobs. What it does, it creates an economic environment for more growth. It provides the transportation that we need to get goods and services, and for us, even more importantly, to get the people to and from work. It provides the the water and the energy and the wastewater and everything else that allows us to grow. Because if that infrastructure isn't there, the growing businesses or businesses that want to locate here will find places where they can get that that sort of public service support. So there's no question about that.
Quinn, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Chair Hertzberg, Chair Gomez, thanks very much for the opportunity to be here, members. I'm last, so I can be brief. My name is Tim Quinn. I'm the Executive Director of the Association of California Water Agencies. ACWA is arguably the most diverse player in California water policy. We represent 430 roughly public agencies. They're northern, southern. East-west is an increasingly important political divide for me. Ag, urban, very diverse. I answer to a 36-member board that's no less diverse, and in July they voted unanimously and strongly to oppose the initiative that you're discussing today, largely because we think it does go beyond the elephant or the water fix. It seems clear to us that that is a major reason for why we're having to wrestle with this now. Just on that quickly, on the issue of the water fix, my board does not have a position on that project as a standalone project. I wouldn't take it to them because if the only thing you're talking about is the delta, the only thing you're going to have is an argument. They do, however, unanimously support a comprehensive program like Governor Brown's California Water Action Plan, and they recognize that it requires delta solutions to work effectively for the state as a whole. But again, I don't think this measure has that much to do with the with that elephant that Representative Eggman mentioned. And our primary concern, this is not a good idea even if it only applied to the elephant. But our concern is that it goes beyond the elephant. I found it interesting that proponents agreed that it does, and that is in fact the intent, that it go beyond just a single project. So some that we're worried about that I'll share with you. Many projects that are that we hope will be built with financing from Proposition 1, overwhelmingly passed by the voters in November 2014. A lot of them are large-scale projects. They'll require joint powers authorities. They'll require cooperative arrangements with the state of California. We're concerned that they could be at risk. The storage projects in particular come to mind, whether you're talking about Sites Reservoir or Temperance Flat or Los Vaqueros in the Delta, or there are some innovative ideas about other storage projects. They will have opposition, and this could be another tool to try and impede or obstruct those projects. ACWA member agencies spend tens of billions of dollars on local infrastructure, recycling, desalinating, the canals and pipes and the water treatment plants that deliver water, safe, reliable water to California. Almost all of that is financed by water revenues, and I recognize that it's not all at risk here, but every large-scale project, no matter how meritorious, no matter how popular, has got opposition. And we're here creating another tool for the opposition to grab onto, to use legal uncertainties, to drag you into court, to slow you down, to raise your costs and try and stop you in your tracks. Whatever you think about the water fix, this is not a good idea from the perspective of the public agencies that deliver California's water.
Any other question? I have one. Yes, sir.
You know, the biggest thing that costs money in projects, as you pointed out, is delaying projects. So I wonder if you can reflect on just this initiative and having to go to ballot for a $2 billion plus project. How much money would just doing that cost in terms of just delay cost? You know, like a $2 billion. What's the annual construction index percentage, you know, where cost the project, the average over the last 20, 30 years, the construction index in terms of, bid prices go up and down, but if we're having to go to ballot measures, does that adds to the cost of a project? So can we comment on the economics here? This is real economics, and if the costs go up, these are revenue bonds, right? So if the costs go up, the taxpayer has to pay more money, right? The tax rates for these bonds go up, right? Am I saying? I mean, it has to balance, right? So you comment on that kind of.
Well, there's lots of different costs that can be involved. First of all, the revenue bond doesn't go on the ballot automatically. The legislature has to put it on the ballot. So the legislature has to make that decision. They can decide not to put it on the ballot. They could decide, so the time delay could be never. So it go through and that could take a couple years. Then it could be another couple years till it gets on the ballot. So it could be 3-4 years, even longer, before a project could get on the ballot. That could, if a construction cost, I don't know what the construction cost index is, but, if you compound 5% over 4 years, that's 25%, just in not counting all the litigation costs and.
I didn't ask that. I figured that would be speculative to estimate that, but I think the construction delay cost is a real cost.
But then the other thing is that if you're being leveraged by an opponent and you decide you don't want to go through the whole ballot measure business and you'll just make a change, that could cost the project as well. You could have to do more things in the project to satisfy or make the project less effective.
I can also add on to that. If you're looking at just what happened in recent history, when we were coming out of the economic recession, there was a lot more competitiveness about contractors, and so they were sharpening their pencils and providing better bids a lot cheaper than before when there was an economic boom. So if you had waited 2 years, let's say from 2012 then to 2014, the price of materials and all your other costs associated with construction would have been much higher, including your bids, because there would be more work associated already or back online.
Yeah, that kind of fluctuates based on the economy, right? So if we're in a sweet spot for a good bid, and we have to delay it for 2 or 3 years, we lose that sweet spot for a nice bid on a project. And then, of course, when we get to the point where it's costing more, the taxpayer rates go up for whatever the water rates or whatever the revenue source of the bond would be, that cost would go up and the rates would go up.
Correct.
Mr. Morlock?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since we're having a gentleman's discussion today, since we can't do a whole lot other than discuss the measure.
Hopefully the proponent can see the light.
Well, let me address that a little bit, because I did a ballot measure in Orange County in 2008. It was called Measure G, and it just simply followed a charter component from the county of San Francisco. And it said that anytime the Board of Supervisors negotiated a pension improvement, which would create a liability, then that would have to be approved by the voters before it would be enacted. And that ballot measure passed like with 80% of the vote. I mean, the voters just really seem to have an antagonism towards debt, and that's what this individual is having, and it's getting frustrating for some of my constituents. A lot of them, when I'm out in public, and you say, we got to work on our roads, but they're saying, well, but why are we spending $68 billion on high-speed rail? Why don't we fix the roads? And so the disconnect is being lost. People just don't. It's a bad message to say we're going to spend all this money on high-speed rail, which no one's going to use, and then say, well, you need to pay a tax for your road. So we're creating some angst out there. And I've been an officer of a county, and I've been on the sell side. I've been over a few $1 billion of bonds, Mr. Chair. I've been involved in this process for quite some time, including the refundings. And so I was asked a lot to speak to the annual bond buyer conference every October for California. And in 1996, I found myself on a panel. And it reminds me of what we're going through here, but the discussion was Prop 218, and that was on the November ballot. And we could think of all these arguments of why 218 was not a good thing for the industry, just like we're talking about this ballot measure. It was at Marina Del Rey. I can still remember being there on the panel. I said, I don't think, what I think you need to think about is that this thing passes. And I see the same thing happening with this ballot measure. I don't see the author, underwriter backing out. From what I know, and I don't know him, I've never met him, but he's 79 years old, so he's got legacy issues, right? He's trying to get something accomplished. So I would say that if I had to make a prediction, which I did at that panel 20 years ago, that this measure passes. So you need to think really carefully about how you campaign against it. You need to figure it out, because I think the public tide is going to help this thing pass, and I'm not here to say that's the right thing to do. I'm just telling you that's where I kind of sense. So, Mr. Chair, maybe mid-November we have a lunch, and if I was right, you buy, and if I'm wrong, I buy.
Well, buy anyway, but the only thing I would suggest, Senator Morlock, is the following. I thought about this a lot, and I don't mind fundamental shifts. Measure G had to do with the full faith and credit of taxpayers going forward. The question here is, you're absolutely right. There's extraordinary frustration on voters. There's a momentary temperament shift, which a lot of folks didn't get, and you're seeing it play out in the national stage. But that being said, our job, rightly or wrongly, is to defend the common good, to defend the right thing to do. And the question here that we all have to pose, given this, what's the biggest thing I get? Number one issue when I talk to people about businesses is litigation. Somebody slips on the sidewalk and they sue in California. The notion of leverage for litigation, it's one of the biggest issues of folks. And now what you've done is you've taken the entire sector that has, except for a couple of aberrations, and you're taking that sector of finance that has worked elegantly as an important tool, and you've basically thrown it into disarray and eliminated the ability for the state to build infrastructure and or to provide tools to hospitals and to schools and the like to be able to reduce costs, right? 99.99% of this stuff is working brilliantly, and so in order to create optics to capture that frustration that says we're going to make people vote. So I just would think that this is a fundamentally different approach than Measure G. And I fundamentally, I wouldn't have come back to government if I didn't have faith in folks. Is it hard? Sure. But these are rational arguments. These are made on a bipartisan basis. You've got a labor union sitting next to the Chamber of Commerce. You've got a substantially Republican water agency group. It doesn't matter. It's not about that. Is this an irresponsible tool? Are the actors irresponsible? Are there examples that you can use at a time of destabilization to get this passed? This is not Measure G. This is not Prop 13. This is not 218. Those had principles and a whole different idea. This is shutting down a critically important tool that's available, that's worked brilliantly at a time when interest rates are low, financing is critical, and the ability, if we find out, because look, we course correct, we make mistakes, we try to fix it. The one thing I've learned in this process is that you give the right to the people, and I get that, the ability to unwind this, because we all recognize Mr. Cortopassy's 85 years old at that time in the future. He says, I made a big mistake. I want to go and put a bunch of money in to fund this. The odds of him to be able to do that would be very difficult. And I just ask cooler heads to prevail as we engage, because that's the purpose of this process, to honestly and honorably take in the data that you got and to try to come up with a solution that achieves your objectives without the unintended consequences.
Well said, Mr. Chair. One more story. I was a signatory on Proposition 71 in opposition. And Prop 71 sets up a stem cell organization, issued $3 billion in debt, and try to generate patents that would then generate royalties, et cetera. The biggest boondoggle that the state has ever seen in abusing the proposition system. You can do books on how crazy this thing is. But, when you have someone like Christopher Reeves dying in the middle of the campaign and having reporters in your face, how could you be opposed to stem cell research? It passed, but it wasn't the right thing to do. So I'm just telling you, there's an emotional thing going on. And I would recommend that you listen carefully to what the chairman has said and help his counsel help you script your campaign to oppose the ballot measure, because this one's going to be tough. That's all I'm saying. I don't have a position either way, but I'm just kind of sensing things. So,
Chairman Gomez.
Thank you. I've been listening to the testimony most of the day, and this initiative is really just is meant to target just one project. We all get that. But the way it has been drafted, and by the comments throughout the day, is very, very dangerous and irresponsible for all sorts of projects in the state. People listed them out, from the UCs to water projects to hospitals. And I think that we have a responsibility in the state when we try to craft legislation, at least legislation, to make sure that we minimize the unintended consequences, and we have a process. And I hope that it's unfortunate that the proponents don't really care what kind of impact it has on the state. The representatives of the proponents don't really care. As long as they're, getting paid, they're okay. And I think that is irresponsible. I think this is a bad deal, and you're right, it might actually pass. And it's going to be up to every one of us who actually believes that this is dangerous, even including my friends on the other side of the aisle, to speak up and convince your voters to vote this down. That's what I'm going to do in my district, and I think it actually will fail in my area of town, at least in my district. And but we definitely need the voices from the local level, from both sides of the aisle, to make sure that people understand that this is a misguided attempt to stop one project that's going to hurt the entire state of California.
Thank you. Senator Bell. And then public comment. Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate all the testimonies, pro and con. I think we had some very vigorous discussion, and that was very good. I think when we pass laws, we really spend a lot of time looking at all facets of the legislation. We have laws go through many committees. The public process is pretty extensive, and that's good. I think we also have that at the local level. However, when you do initiatives, until we had this law passed, this is really the only public airing of these kinds of initiatives. And it's very important that we recognize that a lot of initiatives have had flaws that cause major problems. And I think this initiative has some flaws. And I think for me the biggest one is the lack of safety it provides Californians from disasters, man-made or natural. I think that's the biggest flaw. I think it creates an element of risk that increase in the state, and that element of risk is will be costly over the next decades if this measure passed. So when we look at measures, we want to eliminate those kinds of things, those flaws, and I think that's, to me, the biggest flaw that I can see. Element of risk includes not only fiscal risk, but it also includes personal risk, and that includes not repairing or facilities that need to be repaired to save lives and prevent disasters from affecting people in a catastrophic way, in a personal way. So I think those are the issues that I retain from the hearing, and I appreciate the hearing from all parties. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Public comment? Anybody have any comments from the public? Nothing? Seeing nothing further, joint meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for your patience.